So let's take Facebook and social media and the way they've affected the information commons and the epistemic commons writ large. So we know that the nature of the algorithms optimizing for time on site while being able to factor what I pay attention to, the whole Tristan Harris story, makes almost it very few people wake up and say, I'd like to spend 6 hours on Facebook. And so I'm going to spend more time on Facebook if I kind of leave executive function, rational brain, and get into some kind of limbically hijacked state where I forget that I don't want to spend my whole day on Facebook. And so time on site maximization appeals to existing bias and appeals to limbic hijacks. So if I piss off and scare the whole and elicit sexual desire and whatever of the whole population while doubling down on their bias and creating stronger in-group identities associated with out-group identities, the algorithms optimize. Well, it is an AI of the power that beats Kasparov at chess, beating us at the nature of the control of our attention. So we can see that the right got more right, the left got more left, the conspiracy theories got wackier, the anti-conspiracy theory people became more upset at the idea that a conspiracy could ever exist. Basically, everybody's bias doubles down and they all move apart from each other faster. Well, society doesn't get to keep working. That is a democracy killer, right? That's an open society killer. There's a reason China controlled its internet. Is if you don't want your society to die, you have to be able to have some shared basis of thought. So we can say, and the story is, oh, we didn't know that was going to happen. Well, you go back and look, and guys like Jaron Lanier were at the very beginning of Facebook and Google, whatever, saying, hey guys, this ad model is going to fuck everything up. Like, you can't do the ad model thing. You got to have pay for subscription or, some other kind of thing. And I was like, shut up, dude. Or just don't even engage in the conversation and then get to say afterwards, failure of imagination. But now, how do you regulate it when those corporations are more powerful than countries? Because the regulation is going to be happen in a court where the lobbyists have to be paid for by somebody, right? So who are the lobbyists paid for by? And it has to be supported by popular attention. And those who can control everybody's attention can also affect what is in popular attention. So this is a very real example where we know the harms were known. And it actually got large enough that it killed the regulatory apparatus's capacity.
Absolutely. In fact, again, this is going to be another alignment of our maps. So what I've been playing with is the idea that we are incorrect in imagining that people necessarily want their expectations flattered, that people actually may like to be challenged, but that it's inconsistent with the well-being of advertisers, that the very fact is, because advertising is only a tiny fraction informative and is mostly manipulative, you have to be in your unconscious autopilot phase in order for it to cause you to buy a car you wouldn't have otherwise bought or buy different deodorant than you would otherwise buy. And so the point is, in order for us to be, the thing gets paid for by advertising. In order to be useful to advertisers, we have to be unconscious. And the only way to keep us unconscious is not to challenge us, basically to tell us what we think we already know rather than what we need to know. And so they're lulling us into this, even though we would still be interested in the platforms if we weren't being advertised to, but we would be interested in having more important conversations there, which is really, in some sense, what the growth of heterodox podcast space is about.
Oh my goodness. Okay, there's two directions I want to go at the same time. I'll just pick one. There's a reward circuit on exercise and there's a reward circuit on junk food, right? And they both have a dopaminergic element and reward circuit, but they're of a very different kind. And the reward circuit on exercise is that it actually feels like shit at first and is hard, but your baseline of happiness measured in whatever, dopamine, opioid axis, whatever, gets better over time. And then you start actually feeling over time, but not quickly. This is another place where temporal myopia ends up mattering, because there's a delayed causation on the healthy one and no delayed causation on the unhealthy one. So I start getting the reward circuit on exercise when I start seeing results. And then I want to push hard. And then I'm willing to actually go against entropy and put energy into the system so the energy grows. Whereas the chocolate cake, I get a reward instantly and I don't have to apply any energy. But as I do it, my baseline gets worse. And this is the like addiction versus health reward circuit direction. And the same is true for scrolling Facebook compared to reading an educational book. At the end of a month of reading the educational books, my life feels better. I feel more proud of myself. At the end of a month of scrolling Facebook, I'm like, what the fuck am I doing with my life? And yet that one will keep winning for the same reason that 70% of our population is overweight and over a third of them obese. And so, but my only hope is that not everyone who has access to too many calories is obese, right? Like there are some people who figured out, hey, that's a reward circuit I don't want to do. And I'm going to exercise and I'm going to not eat all of the fat, sugar, salt that evolution programmed me to have a dopamine hit for because it's a shitty direction. Now, we need to get that number of people who actually have taken some sovereignty over their fitness and well-being in the presence of the cheaper reward circuit. We need to get that number up to everybody because right now, obviously, overweight is one of the main causes of death in the developed world. But we have to then apply that to the even more pernicious hypernormal stimuli, because salt, fat, sugar are hypernormal stimuli in the gustatory system, right? We have to apply that to the sensory system that's coming in through things like social media. And that means less social media, less entertainment, more study. And it doesn't have as fast a reward circuit. It just doesn't. But it has a much better longer term reward circuit where your baseline goes up. And this is where enough mindfulness and enough discipline have to come in, because otherwise the orientation of the system is that it's more profitable for corporations for me to be addicted because you maximize lifetime value of a customer through addiction. And it's an asymmetric war because they're a billion or $1 trillion company and I'm me. So how do I win in that asymmetric war where it's in their profit incentive, whether it's McDonald's or Facebook or Fox, for me to be maximally addicted? I have to recognize, holy fuck, right? Like I actually have no sovereignty, even if I claim to live in a democracy, against these autocracies who want to control and manipulate my behavior in a way that is net negative for me holistically while having the plausible deniability that I'm choosing it because they're coercing my choice. So I have to get afraid of that enough that I mount a rebellion, right? A revolutionary war in myself against those who want to drive my hypernormal stimulus reward circuit. So the whole, how can everybody become more immune to the shitty reward circuits and notice them and become immune to them? And how can they become more oriented to the healthy reward circuits? That's another way of talking about what we have to do writ large.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Completely agree. In fact, it dovetails with another thought that first time I thought it was original, and then having said it, I discovered lots of people had said it before me, that there's a very close relationship between wisdom and delayed gratification, that it's the ability to bypass the short-term reward circuit in order to get to something deeper and better, that is what wisdom is about. But you didn't include on your list what I consider to be maybe one of the most important instances of the failure that you're talking about, which is sex. There's a very direct comparison, at least for either males who are wired in a normal fashion for a straight guy, or women who are toying with that same programming, which I believe there are many. But the comparison between casual sex, which is certainly, we are, as males, wired to find that a very appealing notion because it's such a bargain. If you can produce a baby where you're not expected to contribute to its raising, that's a huge evolutionary win. And then you have to compare that to the rewards of a deep, romantic, lasting relationship with commitment. And the problem is that the deep, lasting relationship stuff has a hard time winning out over the instant gratification thing if the instant gratification thing is at all common. And so that's really screwing up people's circuitry with respect to interpersonal relationships and bonding. And I have a sense that it is also, in a way that's much harder to demonstrate, contributing to the derangement of civilization. That many fewer people have a relationship. It's not like marriage is easy, right? It's not. It's super complex. But having somebody who you can fully trust, somebody who you've effectively, fused your identity with to the level that they share your interests and, they may be the only person who'll tell you what you need to know at some points. And the fact that many people are missing that, I think, is deeply unhealthy.
Yeah, so I would say that market type dynamics benefit from exploiting the shitty reward circuits across every evolved reward circuit axis. And so from an evolutionary point of view, survive and mate are the things that make your genes get through primarily. So we mentioned the survive, the calorie one earlier, right? So in an evolutionary environment, I could get plenty of green leafy things in many environments. It was very hard to get enough fat, enough sugar, and enough salt. Those were evolutionarily rare things. So more dopaminergic hits on those. So fast food ended up figuring out how to just combine fat, salt, sugar with no other nutrients with maximized ease of palatability and textures. And there's like a scientific optimization of all of the dopamine hit with none of the nutrients. So you can actually be obese and dying of starvation, right? And what that is to nutrition, where you should have a natural dopaminergic hit on something that has nutrients built in for, adaptive purposes, is what porn and online dating is to intimate relationship, is what Facebook and Instagram is to tribal bonding. Is how do we take the hypernormal stimuli part of it out, separate it from the nutrients, and make a maximally fast addictive hit that actually has none of what requires energetic process?
Yeah, I've called this the junkification of everything, and it is directly an allusion to junk food where we can most easily see this. But the idea is you will be given a distilled, so if I can rephrase what you said in terms that are more native to me, when you are wired to seek, the umami taste that tends to be very tightly correlated with meat, you will tend to get a lot of nutrients along with it in the ancestral context. In the modern context, we can figure out how to just trip the circuit that tells you to be rewarded, and it's no longer a proxy for the things that it was supposed to lead you to. And as you just said, you can now look at that across every domain where you have these dopamine rewards and understand why people are, living in the world that Pinker correctly identifies we are living in, where we have just a huge abundance, and yet are so darn unhealthy, certainly unsatisfied, right? It explains that paradox of being better off in many ways than any ancestor could have hoped to be, and yet being effectively ill across every domain.